This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on this COVID-19 edition of the podcast, joining me remotely from England, is Richard Simpson, Vice Chairman of Simpson's Malt. Welcome to the podcast, Richard.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks. We are. This is the first time we've done an overseas, edition of this podcast remotely, and we're going to. But at the same time, this podcast has been a little time coming. I remember we were talking about it at Big Beers in up at Breckenridge in January, and we had planned on getting together at CBC this year for an in-person conversation, and things just happened, and this is the world we live in. And now we're here talking.
That was the last time I was overseas, which seems incredible. I'm usually traveling a lot more, but yeah, that was a fun festival.
For sure. Looking forward to this conversation. We're certainly going to talk about malt and Simpson's traditional and contemporary approaches to producing great malt that brewers love to use and the things that add character to it. Before we do that, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River, Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, and more. Trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by HS1228 Hops. Third in the new BSG Hops solution portfolio, HS1228 takes you all the way to the heart of the West Coast. HS1228 is bursting with pronounced tropical fruit like mango, pineapple, citrus, and pine characteristics that bring out a classic West Coast hop character. Designed for late kettle or dry hop for various hop-forward styles. Learn more about BSG Hops solutions online and look for more BSG Hops solutions releases coming soon. Richard Simpson,
Jamie,
your family-owned maltster, has a long tradition of making high-quality malts for brewers around the world. Give me a little bit of that family business history in a nutshell. How Simpsons came to make malt in the way that they do, and what that history looks like.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm a fifth generation maltster, or as I call it, the don't mess it up generation. I'm just here, custodian, hopefully pass it on one day. And yeah, we've been around since 1862. We actually started off as something called a corn factor, or corn factors, who are agricultural merchants. So they were used to buying barley, selling it to maltsters, and thought that looked like a good thing to do. So went into malting pretty soon after that. So started off by James Parker Simpson back then. And we've been doing that ever since, generation to generation. My father is still pretty active. He comes in 2 days a week at the age of 83, and is very useful. Always reminds us when things have been better, when we think we're pretty special, and always reminds us when there's been tougher times, when we think the world's ending. So he's a steady hand for sure. But yes, myself, my cousin's also in the business, and we have a great team full of experts who, sort of guide us through.
For sure. So let's, obviously there's this long century-plus history of malting for you all. I guess you're over 150 years then now, if my quick math is doing correctly.
Very good.
Yeah. Talk to me about the last 20. the last 20 years of the business. Now, again, for a maltster, having watched, having that kind of history, and your father, I imagine, has this incredibly long kind of viewpoint to look at this from. Talk to me about the last 20 years and what you have seen through this kind of craft beer growth, and now over the last decade explosion. What that has meant in terms of how you make malt, what brewers are expecting from you, the kind of interaction and relationships, how that has kind of changed, in the more recent term.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, and 20 years is I've been around for those last 20 years. So that's definitely sort of my journey. I When I joined the business just before those 20 years, I guess we've become very much a maltster that that malted, 4 or 5 different types of malts, and some crystal malts, and they went to about 100 customers. There's quite a few in the UK then. The market was definitely decreasing up until that point, and I think
Because the product that you made was really more geared towards, traditional British styles, or
yeah, and I think we were, yeah, absolutely, and I think brewing in the UK was becoming very much, there were smaller brewers. There's a lot more lager brewing. Cask ale was there, but it was, sort of moving to this sort of keg alternatives all the time. Yeah,
a lot of
and
consolidation in the bigger
yeah,
side of brewing and looking at costs and kind of,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And then we had distilling on the other hand. And I guess what had happened in the last 20 years is as these bigger brewers obviously consolidated, we found that it really wasn't sort of what we were used to as a company all those 100 years. I grew up with stories. My dad would tell me of, going to a dinner would be a 3-day affair. You had these relationships, and you built on these relationships. And then, when I joined the business, I remember being in the boardroom, and I think I was there because I knew how to use a computer, and it was a reverse internet auction for supplying a customer. And I thought, this is a bit different to what I kind of thought it was going to be. And then craft happened, and what's been interesting is it's a return to those relationships, and it's a return to looking at the intricacies and the differences between malts and the quality of those malts, and a true appreciation of what the flavor of those malts can bring to the final product. My dad sort of probably put it best by sort of saying that he kind of recognized it as something. He recognized a lot more in it from, it's almost like a return to traditional brewing methods and those relationships. My late brother was very keen. He'd worked in the roast house. He'd identified some differences in our crystals in the way we did it. He encouraged those differences because he saw in craft brewers people that appreciated those differences. So particularly over the last 10 years, we very much switched from those sort of bigger brewers to distilling, and we do a lot of distilling malt, predominantly because of where we're situated. I think they share many things with craft brewers in terms of wanting to build those relationships, in terms of looking for specific quality aspects, and the sort of the sustainability and the traceability of those malts. And so that sort of kind of suits what we're about, which is, about those quality, about building relationships, about the traceability of our products.
How you mentioned, in the earlier days, you were a 5 core product kind of company. What does that look like now? As brewers want more and more kind of precision and focus in what they make. How has that product line changed for you?
Well, it's certainly increased.
Yeah,
We try to be good because we get told off by our production people all the time. They keep reminding us that particularly our plant in the south of England in Norfolk was originally owned by a brewer and was built to service those sort of requirements, but now. So I have to be very careful about sort of bringing up the idea of a new malt because I immediately get a lot of questions about where are we going to put it, you know. That's been a source of a lot of investment, particularly over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. But that is certainly So I mean, now, crikey, we probably have double that in terms of base malts,
yeah.
and certainly our crystals and our roasts portfolio is I don't think it's that big, but it's probably is sort of bigger than the most, I guess.
For sure, for sure. I definitely want to talk to you about one malt in particular, Golden Promise, because we've noticed even in our best in beer poll last year, when we asked our readers about their favorite malt, that one came out on top of that list. But before we start talking about kind of specific approaches to malt and what those ultimately mean for brewers, talk to me a little bit. Let's kind of go back further in the process and talk about the way you work with barley growers, the kinds of barley varieties that you pull in for your various malts, and how that process looks for Simpsons. What does that look like, and how do you work with the agricultural side of barley production?
Well, in the United Kingdom, we do have an approved variety list, and this does help manage the amount of new varieties coming through. It has three general requirements, which is it needs to perform better agronomically. It needs to be able to be malted,
Sure.
and the brewer's got to like it, or the distiller's got to like it. So there's three different sort of target audiences, I guess. There's brewing, there's distilling, and then there's sort of grain distilling. So it's got to be high enzymic malts. That sort of kind of helps the whole UK malting industry and the brewing industry sort of select varieties, and these come through fairly regularly.
And
And
this is done
there,
at a government level, where
yeah,
is this done at an industry level?
it's an industry sort of quango, I guess is probably the wrong term. Somebody will pick me up on the HGCA. So it's a cereals authority. It's funded by government,
Yeah,
by industry, and they sort of manage that. And so the maltsters have obviously helped that by with the malting aspect of it. And brewers will do test batches, and these go through an approval process. We sort of typically call it the sort of stairway to heaven. Apologies to Logan if he listens to this, but it's like there's various processes you have to go through to become authorized. So they've got to tick boxes, and they've got to sort of sustainably do the things they're measured on. So yield and resistance to disease are the two typical ones agronomically. We're really lucky in the UK because the barley is very well suited to sort of beer styles that have re-emerged almost.
yeah.
They do a little bit different. We have this sort of bizarre situation in the UK. We have this maritime climate and these sort of soils, these sort of alluvian soils, and really sort of just seem ideal for sort of growing this barley. And that's probably why we've got the beer styles that we have. because of the barley. With Simpsons, I guess we're different to most, where we actually have that agricultural division. So we have that sort of vertical integration. It's really going back to what we used to do 150 odd years ago, that sort of grain merchants. So we do have a team of agronomists. In the UK, you have to be qualified and certified to advise on agrochemicals and on fertilizers. So that agronomical advice, we have a team of people who do that, who really are measured on their ability to make sure that the barley's good, good enough to come into the maltings, not on how much product they sell. And part of that division as well is seed. So we actually grow seed up of various varieties. So we can really go back, and the sort of that really helps with certain varieties. One in particular you've mentioned is Golden Promise. Varieties like Golden Promise and Maris Otter are no longer on those approved lists because they have been outperformed agronomically for many years already. So the approved list is more guidance than thou shalt grow this. But obviously farmers look to it because they know, in terms of an economic model of growing these sorts of things, they're kind of what everything hangs on. And maltsters, we know it all malt. Hopefully, if we're doing things right, and brewers know that it's a common variety, that it's sustainable. If not forever, then for long enough. So it's quite elaborate. Sorry, it's a bit of a long answer and dodges about a bit.
No. We love talking about this on the podcast, and talking with Tim Matthews of Oster Blues and Canarchy. We talked about the same kind of thing. This the relationships between agriculture and these and then how that becomes ingredients, which then become beer. All the pieces of this chain are important. The relationships are important, and then the viability of each of those things along the way matters, because you have to build this entire ecosystem that works for everyone in the chain and not just for the brewers. These are important things, and everyone who is making beer should understand these. It's interesting, and I want to talk to you a little more about Golden Promise. I love this idea that this beloved thing for brewers may not be the most agronomically effective thing from a grower perspective or even a maltster perspective. Let's talk a little bit more about that. But first, with nearly 20 years of innovation and experience, Brewmation specializes in electric, steam, and direct fire brew houses, complete cellar solutions, and automated controls for the craft brewing industry. From half-barrel to 30-barrel systems, Brewmation puts you in control to design a brewery that fits your needs and brewing style. Whether you're starting a new brewery, upgrading your cellar, or just need some parts to keep you up and running, Brewmation has you covered. Visit them at brewmation.com to get started. Also, Grandstand is your source for the latest trends in branded drinkware, apparel, and promotional items. They make your job easy by serving as your one-stop shop for everything you need to outfit your taproom and fans. Current trends include to-go drinkware, tie-dye prints, and portable coolers. Visit egrandstand.com/lookbook to see what's trending. That's egrandstand.com/lookbook. We were talking before the break about Golden Promise and how this is a different kind of now no longer approved barley variety. Talk to me a little bit about what Golden Promise is. Obviously, it's a malt that's rather beloved by American brewers, especially IPA brewers, for kind of building a malt character in otherwise very, very light beers. That's certainly, as everything has gotten lighter and more brewers are using less kind of crystal caramel malts in hoppy beers in particular for some other kind of longevity reasons. finding character in base malts is a harder and harder thing to do, and a more important thing. And so, yes, a lot of brewers have latched on to Golden Promise. Talk to me about what it is, and from the start, what that kind of barley variety, and then what, from your perspective as a maltster with over a century and a half of experience, what it is that creates the kind of magic in that specific malt.
Well, Golden Promise is it's over 50 years old as a variety. So it shares that with Maris Otter, which is another malt that everyone probably knows.
Yes.
It started life off as a distilling variety predominantly. It took the agricultural world by storm. It seemed to ripen early in the field, and that was a big bonus for farmers, because especially the further north you get, as you may have heard, we get a little bit of rain in the UK. And it all helps to make some lovely barley. But if you can get it out of the field early, that's good, and because you can start thinking about your next crop. So agriculturally, they like that. It yielded better than the varieties that are about then, and varieties in those days rarely changed. I don't think there was a stairway to heaven back then. It was somebody came up with a good one. Great, let's try it out. Brilliant, it works. So it started life off predominantly as a distilling variety, and was really popular. We were certainly selling it to distillers well into the 80s, even the 90s. There was one distillery in particular that kind of carried on distilling with it for well into the 90s. The odd brewer used it. Probably the most famous one is Timothy Taylor's, and they've used it for well over 40 years. So I think they liked it. They liked the sort of character it gave that you mentioned. It seems to give a mouthfeel that isn't replicated in too many other malts. And even if you're kilning it very lightly, even with that sort of distilling spec kind of kilning, it sort of gives plenty of character and plenty of mouthfeel. And I think, like you mentioned, that's why it's been seen a resurgence a little bit, because it seems to be able to cope with and interact with hops slightly differently, and it seems to be able to cope even with the heaviest hop additions, and also even with sort of lower ABV beers. And I know lower ABV over where you are and sat is probably a lot different to what we're talking about here in the UK, but it still seems to carry that mouthfeel through. We love it. I mean, it did get to a stage where I think probably less than 2,000 tons of it was grown in the UK, and that's when we sort of looked to step in a bit, take control of the management of it, and having that seed plant really has helped with that. So we have that variety now. We let another maltster down in Yorkshire by the name of Fawcett's, which I'm sure the listeners have heard of too. We let James arrange some GP to be grown so they can use it, and that's because we trust them as a competitor, and we believe it keeps us honest too, in terms of not being seen to have a monopoly on it. So we do compete on contracts with in the best possible way with James, everywhere it seems, to sell that. Damn that guy. No, I love that guy. Golden Promise has it's gone from well, we try to grow a little bit more every year. Not, sometimes the elements are against us on that, so it doesn't always work. And we find farmers who still remember growing it back in the
Yeah.
day. And the farmers I know, they must be crazy growing malting barley, right? I mean, they could just grow something easy, but they just seem to take a real love of growing something that isn't straightforward, and they love doing that. And then you add an element in of, oh, hey, here's a variety that basically went out because it yields terribly compared to modern varieties. Oh, and it's not so good against mildew. And they just sort of seem to go, oh yeah, great, that's brilliant. Let's have a go with that. So
I like a good
yeah,
challenge.
yeah. So they like doing it, but the challenge is it does yield, gosh, a lot less, and that's really where you have to incentivize them to do that. So that's
Right.
that's why the barley is more expensive, and therefore that's why the malt's usually more expensive. Uh, and every farmer that grows it for us grows it on contract, right up front. We sort of, we basically look to do the agronomy for them. So we like to have some control over what they're doing with that, because we, yeah, we like to have that traceability as well.
Sure.
And yeah, and actually it's been pretty successful. So I think we've gotten to ground this year hopefully about 12,000 tons of Golden Promise barley this year. Hopefully, depends if the weather behaves itself.
When you're talking about agriculture, it's always only hopefully, there's no
Yeah,
guarantees.
yeah. We definitely sort of say, not just out the field. We
Right.
want to hear reports back from FVs and distillers mash tuns before we're happy. That's for sure.
Yeah, what does that process look like? Obviously you've got multiple different growing areas. The UK as an agronomic region is not as diverse as a country the size of the United States, where you've got, the South and Northeast and the Pacific Northwest and the Upper Midwest with very incredibly different
Sure.
environmental conditions. There's a little more uniformity. There's still some variance, obviously, from north to south, closer and farther from water. But how much of that kind of variety and variance do you find in that raw barley coming in? And what does your team do to kind of help make sure that barley meets the specs as it's coming in?
Yeah, sure. So we do. There is some sort of general growing areas for arable, I suppose, or particularly for barley, the sort of combinable crops, which probably goes right up to the north of Scotland, predominantly down the east coast of the UK. East Anglia, you've got some fantastic sort of soil and conditions there for 9 times out of 10 you're getting the best barley out of there. And then it kind of just sort of goes south a bit, Hampshire. We do get some grown in Cornwall and places like that. Gets quite wet there. Get a lot of rain. Even though everyone goes on their holidays there, you get quite a lot of rain. Yeah, and varieties are different. The varieties, I guess, in the north tend to be more for distilling. So those varieties are also GN-free varieties. So that's glycosidic nitrile, which is something the distillers would like. And you could argue they need to be tough enough to cope with the elements that you might find in Scotland. Get a lot of sunshine in Scotland, but you also get a lot of rain, and it is colder than you
Sure.
get down south. So things like Maris Otter, for instance, you don't really look to grow that up north. It's not, it doesn't work out too well. GP we tend to grow in the area where our agronomists are, and because traditionally it was, a distilling variety, tends to be up here, perfectly suited for up here. And the other sort of varieties, they tend to be sort of good for brewing and distilling, but where the differences are, if they're not very good distilling, they do tend to naturally be grown further south. And I've forgotten the rest of your question, Jamie.
No, as I'm
Or
hearing
how
you
do you
talk.
make sure?
Yeah. How did they, kind of, what does that kind of quality assurance process on barley coming into the malt house before it goes through the malting process look like?
Yeah, sure. So, typically when grain arrives at the maltings, the four typical bits of analysis that you'd look at for every batch are your moisture and your protein, or nitrogen as we call it, and you have a screenings level just to see how bold it is, and you have a viability test. So you usually do a quick what's called a tetrazolium test, which basically is just measuring to see that grain is alive, because if it's not alive, it's not going to malt.
Right.
So the moisture is really a check, because you need to be able to store it safely so that it doesn't sort of end up going off, dying, encouraging beasties. In quite a lot of the UK, we dry the barley when it comes off the field. It will certainly come off a lot higher in moisture than it would, say, in Idaho or somewhere like that.
Sure.
So, drying we regularly do, certainly in the north of England. In fact, we do it in the south of England too, but we quite often use it as a mechanism to sort of reinforce some homogeneity in the grain and the bulks, and also it sort of helps break that natural dormancy you get in barley, so that hopefully it's ready in a homogeneous way a bit earlier than it normally would be. So those are the four main tests, but of course we do other tests. We obviously send away, as part of a due diligence scheme, pesticide analysis and heavy metals, all those good stuff.
Right.
But those are predominantly the four sort of varieties. So we tend to, that's when your quality control really sort of starts. You can do bits before, obviously, but that's when we start to look to segregate it on protein levels, on the size of the grain. That's when you really start to see if you can separate it, so that you can start to fine tune those bulks that would be sort of drawing on for the next 12 to 15 months. I mean, it's where I started in summer holidays, and it was always sort of, the quote that was always quoted at me by everyone then, by my father. It's what we have in our sort of the entranceway to our office is: the art of making good malt out of poor barley is yet to be discovered. A guy called Robert Free, 1884, I think, and we still believe that now. If you get that bit wrong, you're really going to have a nightmare for the whole year. So, the one thing I should mention, of course, is you physically check it. So, hopefully it doesn't smell of diesel, or hopefully it looks good, and hopefully it doesn't smell bad, and hopefully you don't have any bugs either. You don't want bugs in a malt house.
For sure. No, you don't.
They're eating all the grain. That's terrible. You've paid for it.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the malting process and what that looks like for Simpson's. But before we do that, are you looking to start or expand your craft brewery? Look no further than Abe Beverage Equipment for complete brewing and packaging solutions. Abe has been a trusted partner for over 1,000 breweries worldwide and is known for their excellent service. Contact Abe today for a quote on a complete brew system at abeequipment.com. Abe offers turnkey solutions from 3 to 60 barrel brew houses and canning lines from 15 to 90 cans per minute. Visit abeequipment.com for complete brewery solutions. That's abeequipment.com. brewing.com. Also, Craft Beer and Brewing's All Access subscriptions give you a year of the print and digital editions of the magazine, plus access to our library of video courses, a special deep dive email only for All Access subscribers, premium content, and All Access exclusive merchandise. Go to beerandbrewing.com and click on the subscribe button to join now. So once that barley is in your process, Richard, what does talk to me about that malting process and what that looks like, for Simpson's.
The sort of classic elements of steeping, germination, and kilning. We have probably 90% of what we do are in bits of kit, maybe slightly less bits of kit that are very similar. We still have one quite old stream that my father built in the 60s, or part of it, and we have subtle variations depending on the malt. We got kind of an old drum maltings which we use as part of our crystal making process, but also we make green malt for a customer, so unkilled malt that goes through some drums as well. So we really sort of use the slightly smaller batch sizes. So the malting process. Okay, this is where I hope my colleagues aren't listening. So the first element is steeping.
You're going to give us the high level view of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I've been learning. So steeping, first process in earnest in malting, and that's really about kicking off that sort of process of turning barley into malt. That's really trying to, and all malting really is trying to do, is trick that barley into thinking it's in a field and it needs to grow. And so by basically putting in a big steep tank with lots of water, really sort of gets that moisture into the grain, and that really sort of wakes it up and gets it going. And you're looking to get the moisture of that barley from sort of about 12% up to about 46-47%, and you do that by steeping. And steeping has sort of two main processes, which is like in water, and you drain the water away and you don't have water. And because it's a living thing, you need to make sure you don't drown it by having it underwater all the time. So you get the moisture up, you let it start to kind of almost respire, and then you get the water in again. And you can do that 2 or 3 times. Depends on the malt you're making, depends on the nature of the barley at the time. Right. But the key things for steeping is trying to get a really nice homogeneous sort of start to this malting process. Try and get a nice even moisture. It'll start to chit, which is basically the barley plant starting to grow, and you're looking for that to be even, and that's your first visual indicator that you're getting a nice even start to that process.
Because there are layers here in the steeping tank, and you want everything to be moving along at the same kind of pace. Sure. So
and so we're I suppose we're a bit different. We've got these cylindro-conical steeps, which isn't very different. We've got a very we usually have quite a sort of acute angle on these cylindro-conical steeps, about 65 degrees, and we have a central column going through them with a deflector at the top. So we give it a really good mix every now and then, and that's by blowing sort of low pressure, high volume air from the bottom, and it just drags up through that central column, and it just drags everything around. So you get a really good mix, and that breaks out any air pockets that might appear. It really mixes everything up, and it also releases any sort of build up of CO2 because it's starting to live, right? So that's probably. I mean, I know that's a bit different because when we were looking to build new ones a few years ago, my brother and I basically drove to Germany to the people who were making our maltings back then to try and persuade them that you could do it, and that and they were, they're the engineers, right, and German engineers to boot, but we pretty much were sure you could do that. It wouldn't be a problem. And
since you
you know,
already had them.
well, yeah, I think it's more the size of them that we
Oh,
had,
okay.
because we can get about 80 tons of grain in some of these, and they were a little bit worried about them all falling over, or the whole building falling apart. Which, yeah, after some teething problems, we sorted out some of the realities of it. But yeah, that's the steeping process. From that, we predominantly move it to what we call our germination kilning vessels, or our GKVs. So we don't just germinate in those; we also kiln in those. But in terms of the sort of actual vessel and how it looks like, it's circular again. Has a central column. We have a plenum chamber, so it sits on these perforated metal floor. Our vessels, the floor actually moves round rather than the beam. Um, the beam's important because it has a bunch of turners on it, and the one thing you've got to do with germination is you've got to turn the malt. So if everyone thinks back to those floor maltings where you have to turn it, and they turn it
Right.
with a shovel, this is that, but on a sort of a pneumatic scale, I guess. And you have to turn it, otherwise it tends to knit together. And when you kiln it, you end up having to get it out using sort of, pneumatic drills. Basically, it's like cement; it just
Right.
mats together. So as these rootlets mat together, you need to break it up, and that brings also. That enables you for it to be even again, because the bed depths can be a meter, around about a meter, and you blow in 100% humid air in the bottom through the bed of malt and out, and you're basically managing the temperature so it's even. In growing, it generates heat, so you need to keep it cool. That's why you've got that humid air. In Berwick, we don't have any air conditioning. It's not usually an issue in Berwick upon Tweed. Temperatures never really vary from 0 degrees centigrade. Apologies to I think we had a 25 the other day, and I was worried that the pavements were going to split. But it's fairly even. Down south sometimes, we could do with a bit of air conditioning maybe in the summer, but you can pretty much control it by volume of air going through and the fact you've got some nice cold water, basically fogging jets with the humid air. So you do that for about 4 days, and you're just really trying to manage that sort of that part of the process where the grain itself is releasing enzymes to convert all those proteins into sort of these less complex carbohydrates. And you're doing that without trying to use too much of those starch, because it
Right.
needs that starch to do that. And traditionally, and what we still use now, is you can more or less gauge it by that rootlet growth. It grows under the skin, along the grain, and actually you can. And our sort of maltsters will go around twice a day. They'll still break open the back, see where it is, and that's, it's not the only analysis we do. We obviously have a
Sure.
lab that analyzes moistures, etc. But that's kind of the thing there. If you see it and you think it's growing too fast, or you think it needs a drink of water, no matter what it says moisture-wise, it comes down to that. I just going to mention it's the Otter malting. So
Sure.
there is that element of that. So typically germination's 4 or 5 days, and then you kiln it. So traditionally you might have another building for that, kilning wise, and today still get separate kilns. We basically close a set of doors, open another set of doors, and we blast heat through it. So it stays in the same building, doesn't move it about. We quite like that. It doesn't, break it up, etc. And you kiln it, anything up to 24 hours, sometimes longer, depending on the type of malt, and depending on the product as well. So if it's an ale malt, you're looking to add a bit of colour, a bit of high temperatures. Distilling, you're really trying to be gentle, trying to reserve some of that enzymic activity that the distiller's going to use
What
later
are
on.
those kind of temperature ranges? Obviously, these are going to be in ranges, but
Yeah, centigrade. I don't think that with distilling that you're going to get anywhere higher than 50 to 60 degrees centigrade, which is
Yeah.
what double at 32, something like that. And with ale malts, you're actually sort of ramping it up. So there's a profile to it. They tend to
Yeah.
start low and end up higher, and you're getting those up to sort of 90%. And there's sort of distinct phases in the kilning process, but basically you're looking to halt the process. It's a nice ready package for the next user, and certainly with the brewing, you can start to add things like flavor and color. So that's base malt,
Sure.
and we have a place in Berwick, predominantly does distilling. It's like a big distilling malt factory, but they've really tuned it in there. So look, when it comes to do you want me to talk a little bit about sort of crystal malts and roast malts?
Let's definitely do that.
Okay, so crystal and roast malts. Crystal malts, we do exactly the same for steeping and for germination. We use slightly different vessels for our germination. Down at Timetsall, we have these old drum maltings, which we find makes a really nice, gentle way of making it. But from sort of about day 3, we start to take some out of that drum and we put it into our roast drums. So these are like, I don't know if anyone's seen a coffee roaster. They're like sort of slightly converted coffee roasters. Right. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those now. And at that point they go into the roast drum. We are looking to we basically put in a drum, close all the flaps, so we're not letting any air in, any air out. We're heating that drum, and we're creating this stewing process. So you're trying to retain the moisture inside the drum and inside the grain, but you're adding a lot of heat. And that starts not just that sort of process of stopping it to germinate. You're actually starting to convert these sort of carbohydrates into sugars. And when you do that, we're looking to do that so it's almost a liquid inside. And that's one of our things where it's almost liquid inside. So one of the processes is when it comes towards an end of stewing, the roaster will be taking it out, looking at it, squeezing it. It's not a very good term for it, but it's almost like the zit test people call. It squeezes out, you get this nice sugary liquid comes out. So when you're happy with that and it's uniform, then you open up all the flaps. You're getting some, heat going through the drum, and you're looking to apply that heat quickly, and it's hot. And so what happens to that nice sugary liquid is it starts to caramelize. So you're getting all those wonderful Maillard reactions,
right,
etc., and you can start to add color slightly differently. And if you've got every bit right before then you have something right at the end as a crystal malt that you could break open, and it looks like crystal, because it should look like crystal. It's called crystal, as I keep saying. Now roasting, slightly different.
Right.
So bear with me. So we actually steep. We steep the same way. We then germinate, but for a very short time. I mean, for a day, and then we'll actually kiln it on a traditional kiln. And then we've got a nice sort of similar to dextrin malt, I suppose.
Yeah.
So we've got that packet there that we then put into the roast drum, and we add temperature. And then really it's about adding that temperature in a way that you're balancing color with it getting too hot and charring.
Right.
Because as soon as you char it, it might look dark, but it's not. When it goes into it's just carbon. It's not gonna work well in the mash tun. It's just gonna be, and it's gonna taste. I mean, roast malts do taste bitter, but yeah,
there's an acrid bitterness.
It tastes burnt.
Right.
Yeah, you get
kind
that
of an
real
astringency and that kind of negative
Yeah.
character to right.
Yeah, yeah. So so it ends up like sort of bits of carbon, which you don't want. Um, so yeah, that's roasting
How do you ride
broadly.
that line there, and and kind of manage not to go over? Now, I find it also interesting, in a way that I hadn't considered before, that because with this malt, you're not, unlike base malt, where you're really concerned about the performance and the potential conversion, and and enzymes, like, because these roast malts are used in pretty low percentages,
Yeah,
efficiency and performance is a concern, but it's not the concern.
yeah,
How do those things get balanced in your process?
yeah. So we tend to focus on we do tend to focus on two things um, with our crystals, for instance. One is color, and the other is crystallization. So we do that is one of our specifications. We have something called a farinator or grain cutter, um, and our roasters and our lab team will do a cut, and they will count how many's crystallized, how many have kind of gone over. So they go sort of very black, they're burnt, and then we have ones that go white, and they haven't converted at all. They haven't either, something's gone wrong early on, or they're just, the barley's not alive. So we think that color and crystallization fundamentally comes through as color, as flavor. So we feel as though those are the two things that we can most quickly act on in the
Right.
roast plant. Flavor, if you get those two right, then your flavors should be right. That's the theory. So, and you get changes all the time
Right.
with crop years and stuff like that. But that's, those are two things that we feel we can have direct effect on. And if you get those right, then your flavors will be right.
For sure.
So yeah, we have invested a lot of money in some really, really nice roast drums.
Yeah.
Probat drums. We think they're amazing. We've invested a lot recently, and we've replaced two old Probat drums, which are from the sort of 60s, I guess, which were great, still making amazing crystals, but they needed a little bit of love, care, and attention, and the quote for that was almost the same price as a new one. So we decided, well, we'll go for a new one. And then it was, well, do we go for a new one this size, or do we get the bigger one? So we went for a bigger one because, you don't get these opportunities
Right.
very often.
Right.
And we, hey, we're an independent business. We can make that decision. So we thought, yes, let's make it. So we did that. But so these new vessels are amazing. The information you can get for them is amazing. It's definitely assists that roaster in sort of making those products. We're doing a lot of analysis of something that is forever a moving target.
Right.
But for sure, it definitely helps us probably manage the fact that we have 5 of these, on all the time.
Right.
So it definitely helps us be, it sort of backs up our kind of experience in terms of when do I set that one away so that it doesn't come off at the same time as another one, making it very tricky. So we use that, but definitely the arts of the roaster. Yeah, I mean, it's checking it. We can do grinds. We can do quick color matching by grinding it almost in a coffee grinder,
Yeah.
and looking at it next to comparative samples. We've got the farinators to check it. But yeah, they're very small batch sizes. They're 4 tons
Yeah.
instead of our biggest base malt. It's 400 tons.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
and it's a lot shorter time. It's 3 hours. It's 4 hours.
Yeah.
So you have that ability to react quickly.
Right.
To make sure it's right.
But it also means
and
that someone has to be watching it pretty closely, because there's a
yes,
short time period
yes,
that makes a lot of difference in that kind of process.
that's right. And the real art is finding that consistency.
Yeah.
And and that's very much where the experience comes in, because every time you're taking out the green malt from a 30-ton process into something a chunk at a time,
Yeah.
it takes time, and that whole time the germination is continuing. So
Right.
and then they might be thinking about making a different product from batch to batch. So they're the chefs in our business for sure.
Right.
I'm always amazed. They're incredible.
Right.
They're incredible. But yeah, so that's key, and then how you blend those together afterwards. That's another really important thing in terms of getting that consistency. So it's not even blending two products which are within the same spec but might be the opposing sides of that spec. It's not doing that. It's blending stuff that's closer together so that when you cut it, you get a uniformity in color, because that's what you notice straight away. And we feel like if we kind of look after the small details, then hopefully everything comes together at the end.
That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
So since you're doing these in 4-ton batches, ultimately you're saying that these multiple 4-ton batches are being blended together into bigger batches in order to maintain a total consistency of spec. And it's that I had not considered that before, but that's also, like, physically speaking, a lot of work. Blending 4 tons with 4 tons with 4, I mean, doing this with tanks, like, I mean, brewers understand this, that, even blending things from multiple fermenters into one thing is a technical, like a process challenge. For you all, how does that work? In the malt house to kind of make that evaluative kind of judgment call and say, hey, this is the right blend with this in order to, to hit what we expect and what our customers expect out of this roast malt.
Yeah. So we have a lab at the site. So first of all, there is we've got bits of kit that can measure color in the actual roast house. And also we've got the sort of human eye, so you can quickly ascertain these batches. They all go into separate bins, we call them,
Mm-hmm.
so little blending bins. So each batch goes into its own bin, and none of those are blended away until we get analysis from the lab. So once we get that analysis from the lab of each batch, that's when the sort of the head chef, I guess, will look at it and go, right, okay, what can I blend with something else? So which specs are tight enough that I can blend together to create a uniform spec? And then they will blend that away to a bigger bin, essentially. And so that those analysis bins, those blending bins, are freed up again. Now, for these blending bins, we have the capability to run more than one away at a time, which is crucial because we can run away 2, 3, 4 away at the same time. We can adjust the feed on each bin so that you can make sure that you can even dial down in terms of the colors that go in each of those.
Okay.
If you need to blend away to different bins.
It's so not just all of this. It could be 20% of this and 10% of the other. Or,
So we love technology.
Yeah.
We spend an awful lot of money on kit. It's those things that we don't mind spending that bit of money on, because you'll get years. Last year was a particularly tough year for the roast house in terms of finding a way to get homogeneous sort of steeping and germination through. You really had to push barley last year to modify, and it's really hard to push something in the roast house because you've got to then suddenly really halt it. And the barley's going, what the hell's going on? Do you want me to malt or not malt? And so it's kind of hard.
Yeah.
So we were really, really, really challenged to try and get our crystallizations up last year. Thankfully, we're onto new crop, and it's great. It's like a dream again. It's beautiful. So I'm hoping for good things from my roast house. Lots of good things. So I get the odd picture from Sean, the production manager, saying, check this out. It's 98% crystallization. So he's got to be careful, otherwise I'll expect that of everything, which is probably not realistically what you could get. But
It's such a
yeah,
funny thing how it comes
yeah,
back down to that agriculture, and those different crop years can have such an impact, even on the kind of technical function of malt as it goes through your process. You mentioned
yeah.
when we were talking earlier that the character of malt that's grown in the UK, the beer in the UK has tended to taste the way it does because of the way that of the character of the barley itself. I'd love to unpack that a little bit more and understand what you mean by that, because I think that it's kind of a fascinating place to come from. We talk about terroir often with beer styles like lambic, or where hoppy beers in the Pacific Northwest, where they taste like this place that they come from, whether it's where the hops are grown or what native yeast looks like. But thinking about beer and the flavors of beer as a product of the barley and the terroir, coming from that kind of piece is also interesting. And so when you say that, what talk to me a little bit about, from a sensory perspective, how you get that idea that these flavors that you taste in that barley that's grown in the UK kind of come through and have defined the beer styles that the UK is known for.
Well, I think, traditionally, British barley seem to be low in protein. It maybe looked a bit bolder. So as you malted it, and traditionally, I guess British barleys were British malts were a lot darker. Beer was a lot darker. Mashing was a lot easier. These barleys would malt and modify so readily that they couldn't help but take on colour. And especially back in, hundreds of years ago, where you didn't have a lot of control over that kiln process. So I suppose that's where traditionally they've come. And obviously, as more control came into kilning, we got paler malts. And, that's that first sort of wave of IPAs, for want of a better phrase. That's kind of, I guess, where those started. It's a topic of conversation regularly, in that you get modern varieties coming through, and how much emphasis is put on flavour. The sort of process by which barleys are chosen is it's good, it's consistent, very much I guess influenced by the people who are doing the trials, who are investing in that. And typically they've been the bigger brewers, and typically I suppose they're looking for some consistency, but they've got some great kit, right? And they're trying to brew a consistent beer that they've brewed for years and years and years. Now we're such an innovative industry that's, the next new thing, and how do these flavors interact with other things, like hops, like the yeast, like the water, like the process? How how do we get something extra out of these varieties? And although the varieties change pretty regularly, they don't seem to, and this is where I might get shot down, they don't seem to have the variations like you would if you put it next to a Marisotto or a Golden Promise. And, there's 50 years between these. So, of course not. And I know a lot of people say, well, of course, Marisotto was designed with brewers in mind,
Right.
and, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not sure if it was as, it was like that predominantly. I think they've been made by companies looking at seed. They've been looking at something that is better agronomically, because that does tend to suit everyone down the chain. Flavor, who knows? I mean, I sort of see an opportunity coming up where, as we look to more sustainability, reaching aspects of everywhere, agronomy has very much been about yield and disease control, which is yield again, and not putting inputs in, and so it has kind of become a bit more of an industrialized process. So if we take those away in terms of going, we need to be more sustainable. We need to accept the fact that we shouldn't be chasing yields by the use of of necessarily using chemicals or using those aspects, and if you're making barleys at a bigger yields year in year out, you're going to need more and more assistance to get it grown, get it harvested. Especially in the areas they're grown now. So I think that there's probably a look at how do we take things like carbon out of farming, out of malting, out of brewing. You probably need to start involving things like sustainability, but also things like flavor. So concentrating on something else rather than, well, it grows big, therefore
right.
the economies of scale are great.
It's kind of like bananas or tomatoes. If we have the entire world's crop all of the same banana variety of the same kind of genetic root, there's also a biodiversity, kind of drawback to that, where now we're seeing massive problems with with that, or you've got this kind of monocultural approach to like single varieties that look really good in stores with great color, but also don't have a great flavor, in those kinds of things. And so maintaining that like biodiversity can also be its own goal and end for our agronomic and agricultural kinds of systems, that maintaining some of these different things is good and healthy in the long run. I think for the entire, it also kind of provides the kind of genetic building blocks in the future for some of those next things that may come along in the next hybrids.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that the way we do it is wrong.
Right. No,
I think that I think the opportunity comes from the fact that there might be, instead of getting new varieties, I mean, we have trial plots and there are new varieties every year, all the time, and they cost a lot of money to make these varieties. And it's just like when they finally get one, it's like that kind of pays for all the other research they're doing. Right. So I mean, crikey, I'm glad I'm not I'm glad I'm not a family business owner of somebody who's creating the next seed, for heaven's sake. But yeah, I just think it maybe we might see some more longevity in the varieties, and that means that when one comes along that has flavor attributes that people like, it won't necessarily get replaced by one that's yielding 1 or 2% better than the previous. So that does happen to some extent now, and I think we are challenged a bit more on varieties because our end users are more interested in that and are more picky about those varieties. We've definitely seen that, and I just see there's perhaps opportunities there to kind of not to maybe. Ultimately the brewer is going to choose, or the distiller is going to choose what the variety they want. But there might well be some longevity because there's not going to be that battle to keep that variety going because it's being outperformed on something that we're not necessarily having to chase. And I know yield is very important because,
of course, right.
I'm not backtracking, but I don't want to get into trouble. But you've got to, I realize that, but I think there are opportunities out there to make sure that flavor is part of that conversation going forward.
It's a fascinating thing, again, coming back to the U.S. and looking at it in our, from the perspective of U.S. brewers and maltsters, watching the kind of regionalization of varieties and watching, the local ag extensions for universities working with smaller maltsters and craft maltsters and even larger scale maltsters to help identify functional and effective varieties that perform in the way that brewers need them to perform, and also work in malt houses and kind of supply all of that. But then are focused and effective in each of those different kinds of regions. It's a fascinating thing to watch on a larger scale, and to understand that brewers today, especially because so much of brewing is localized and regionalized, and brewers are serving more and more local and regional audiences, building a story for those beers that comes out of that kind, that is, both this bigger national, this bigger idea of the flavor they want to achieve, and also can incorporate elements of that terroir. These become good stories, and they also filter out into the agronomy for each of those kinds of local growers and areas too. And it's fascinating to watch all of this agriculture happening now at this kind of level in a way that it hasn't necessarily happened in the past, when you had a handful of ultra large brewers trying to maintain pure consistency through everything that they did, no matter where they did it, in whatever kind of part. And so I think that is an interesting piece, that this opportunity for more character and flavor is right there, and accessible to brewers, growers, and maltsters, no matter where they are.
Yeah, so yeah, one of the great joys of the job is introducing brewers to farmers and farmers to brewers, because it's a people business, and people love those connections, and brewers are very interested in where that comes from. They're not interested in us. They're interested in the farmer. They want that connection with the planet.
Yeah, yeah.
And with the what it is, the visceral thing, where it came from. So and the farmers, they absolutely love it. I mean, I know for a fact of farmers literally going, well, I'm going to drink your beer from now on, because they, so they can go sort of, oh, hey, I got this, has got my barley in, this has got my barley in, and it works for distillers too. You create fans,
Right.
and they get a real kick, talking particularly about the States, when we've had, when our distributors, BSG, when they bring over people, and they bring over brewers, and we introduce them, and the brewer will hand them a can of beer or a bottle of beer, and they're like, oh my God, this is, blows their mind, that's something they've grown, over a period of time, has disappeared off in a wagon, and then somebody's bringing something back that they can drink and enjoy, that potentially has come from one of their fields. They're like, wow. They don't know whether to drink it or put it on a shelf, or it's amazing, and there's no bigger joy, because it's that the whole circle of the product. It's fantastic.
That I think that's a fun segue into the way we typically finish off the podcast, and that is this question of what success looks like for you. Obviously, as a fifth generation in this malt business, you all have this idea of family and continuity, and clearly, as we've talked about it, you care about the values, down to the growers, back out to brewers, and even sideways to your own competition, and want to care about the health of this entire kind of economy and community of people that are involved in all of these aspects. But for you and for Simpsons as a company, how do you define success?
Yeah, wow. So the family one is kind of easy. I just want to, I just want to be part of the story of it being in a still there, hopefully in a better position, and a better and a better business, when I finally retire, or wooden box, whatever it is, than when I first joined. And I'm following my father, so if if it's as good, I'll be very happy. Luckily, I've got some really good people helping me with that. Success for us. So the thing I keep on thinking of at the moment is that we love it when we are at shows or we go into a brewery, and we love people tasting our malts. And and it can be a member of the public or a brewer or whoever it is, I don't care, is when they put, it's almost that, you mean I can taste this? And they put it in their mouth, and the expression they get after that, where they're just like, it's like a wow. And that is glorious. That is absolutely glorious, because it just means that, everything's working, and it makes my job a damn sight easier, if I'm selfishly honest about that. But it just means that everything we try to do is come off, and in that malt is all our values, all our investment, all the care and attention of all my colleagues. It's that's a glorious moment. I mean, and actually, if I'm honest, that's what keeps you going year after year, to be honest. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I quite like that.
That's a nice way to put it. Nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. HS1228 takes you all the way to the heart of the West Coast. From a half-barrel to 30-barrel systems, Brewmation puts you in control. Grandstand is your source for the latest trends in branded drinkware, apparel, and promotional items. Abe Beverage Equipment offers complete brewing and packaging solutions. And Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions are the best way to support this very podcast. Richard Simpson, Simpson's Malt. If people want to learn more about Simpsons and what you all do and how you all do it and that history and everything else, where can they find you all?
We are online on our website, www.simpsonsmalt.co.uk. We're on Instagram at Simpsons Malt, Twitter, Facebook. We're across it all. YouTube as well. We have some great snips on there, and we love our barley. So we have reports from trials through to everything on video, especially in these times. We're videoing more and more. So yeah.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with folks that are that passionate about what they do, and we can taste the passion for what Simpsons does, and in the products that you make, and of course the beers the brewers brew with it. So thanks for joining me on the podcast in this kind of remote edition, Richard. It was great to talk to you. I wish we could have done it over a beer in person, but I think this is the next best thing.
Definitely. And before I get my knuckles wrapped, of course, BSG, Brewer Supply Group, they represent us in the States. Oh gosh, sure. I'd get such a slap. But yeah, they're the reason why that we do pretty well in the States. Amazing to our mind, but yeah, they're definitely the reason there. And great speaking to you, Jamie. And for sure, the beers are on me next time.
Sounds good. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.